Most people have no idea that something as small as a single mineral could be behind so much of what their body keeps quietly trying to tell them. The fatigue that arrives long before noon. The cramp that twists the calf at 3 in the morning. The fog that settles in right when focus is needed most. The sleep that never feels quite deep. Does any of that sound familiar? These are not always signs of getting older. Often, they are signs of a body running short on one of its most essential minerals. That mineral is magnesium. And here is the strangest part. The foods that carry the most of it are not new or rare or exotic. They have been growing on this earth for thousands of years. Named in the oldest pages of the Bible. Eaten by shepherds and prophets and ordinary mothers who set them on the table every single day. That is what this list is about. 10 foods, every one of them rooted in the soil of biblical lands. 10 foods that nutrition science has come back to with quiet astonishment. The same seeds and legumes and fruits a farmer in ancient Galilee would have recognized at a glance, sitting on his table just before the lamps were lit. Stay until the very end, because food number 10 holds the most dramatic food story in all of Scripture. A starving man in the book of Genesis traded his entire inheritance for a single bowl of it. His body knew exactly what it was doing in that moment. Most people today have lost that signal completely. Nothing in this video is meant as medical advice. It does not replace treatment from any qualified health provider, and anyone on regular medication should speak with a doctor before making meaningful changes to a diet. The first food on the list grows on a tree that ancient travelers would have walked past in the orchards of the Promised Land. The walnut. The Song of Solomon names a walnut garden directly, and merchants carried these nuts across kingdoms long before paper money existed, sometimes trading them as gifts between rulers. Look closely at a walnut, just once, the next time one is cracked open in a quiet kitchen. 2 lobes, a wrinkled surface, a pale, soft center tucked inside a hard outer shell. It looks remarkably like the human brain. The ancients noticed the resemblance long before anyone could measure what was inside. And the resemblance turns out to be more than poetry. A single ounce, about a small handful, carries roughly 45 milligrams of magnesium. Walnuts are also the only common nut on Earth that contains a meaningful amount of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, the kind research has linked to reduced inflammation throughout the body. For the heart, walnuts have an unusual track record. Clinical studies have shown that regular walnut consumption is associated with lower LDL cholesterol and lower triglycerides. The Food and Drug Administration has even allowed a qualified health claim on walnut packaging, connecting them to a reduced risk of heart disease. And that is not a label handed out without strong evidence sitting behind it. The simplest way to add them is the oldest way. A small handful 2 or 3 times a week, tossed over warm oatmeal, folded into a salad, eaten plain from the shell while the kitchen is still cool. Anyone with a tree nut allergy must avoid them, of course. HI viewers, is there a single bag of nuts or seeds sitting in your kitchen right now, yes or no? Drop the answer in the comments below, because the food that comes next is one that almost every household in the ancient Near East kept within arm's reach of the lamp. The seed that comes next is older than nearly any other cultivated food on this earth. Sesame. Archaeologists have traced its cultivation back more than 4,000 years across the lands of the Bible, and the oil pressed from its tiny seeds was used not only in cooking but in the very lamps that lit homes and temples across the ancient Near East. Long before electricity, long before candles, this little seed kept the night from going dark. A quarter cup of sesame seeds carries around 126 milligrams of magnesium. An extraordinary amount for something so small 1,000 of them fit in a single palm. Tahini, which is nothing more than sesame ground into a smooth pale paste, is the foundation of hummus and a staple on tables from Jerusalem to Damascus. 2 tablespoons of tahini deliver close to 28 milligrams of magnesium, along with a notable amount of plant-based calcium. which is genuinely rare in the world of seeds. Sesame also carries a group of compounds called lignans, sesamin, and sesamoline in the laboratory. Research has been studying these for their antioxidant activity, though the science is still developing and no firm conclusion has been drawn yet for the average person. A spoonful sprinkled across a salad. A swipe of tahini across warm bread. A pinch stirred into yogurt at the end of a long day. Sesame allergy does exist and can be serious for those who carry it, so anyone with a history of strange food reactions should be careful. And what comes next was the food that kept boiling in the pot beside those very lamps. Plain, cheap, and quietly carrying something almost every modern kitchen has forgotten how to put on the table. The pot beside the lamp held something that has been in nearly every household kitchen across the lands of the Bible for almost 10,000 years. The chickpea. Archaeologists have pulled chickpeas from sites in the ancient Near East dating back 9,000 years, and they sit quietly in the food lists of ancient Israel right beside lentils and beans. This was not the food of kings. This was the food of the ordinary table. Half a cup of cooked chickpeas carries around 35 to 40 milligrams of magnesium. That number alone might not sound dramatic. But what makes the chickpea unusual is the company that magnesium keeps inside the little tan-colored bean. There is plant protein. There is iron. There is folate. There is a soft, almost buttery layer of fiber that wraps around every single bite. Hummus is what most people know it as now. And hummus, for anyone who has never thought about it, is nothing more than chickpeas mashed together with sesame paste, lemon, garlic, and a thread of olive oil. 3 of the 4 ingredients have already been quietly named in this story. What chickpeas do for the body has been studied closely in modern nutrition research. The combination of protein and fiber slows down digestion. People who eat chickpeas regularly tend to feel fuller for longer stretches of the day, and studies have found that this often leads to lower overall calorie intake without anyone feeling deprived at the table. The soluble fiber in chickpeas plays a different game with cholesterol. It binds to it in the digestive tract and helps carry some of it out before it ever gets absorbed. The folate inside the chickpea also plays a quiet role in supporting healthy levels of homocysteine, a compound the body produces that, in higher amounts, has been linked in research to elevated cardiovascular risk. For older adults especially, this matters. Some people find that chickpeas cause a little bloating when first added back into the diet. The simple fix is to start small and let the gut adjust. Can chickpeas work just as well as dried? As long as they are rinsed thoroughly under cool water. A bowl of warm hummus with bread on a Friday evening. A handful of roasted chickpeas eaten warm out of the oven. A scoop folded into a salad with lemon and oil. Old food. Quiet food. Doing more than almost anyone gives it credit for. And the next food on this list is going to do something the chickpea cannot. Because no other food on this entire list comes close to the amount of magnesium that hides inside a single small palmful of these little green seeds. The pumpkin and the gourd both appear in the texts of the ancient world, and seeds of every sort have fed people in the lands of the Bible for as long as there have been hands to crack them open. But what hides inside this particular seed is something that almost defies the size it comes in. A single ounce of pumpkin seeds, which is no more than a small palmful, carries somewhere between 150 and 168 milligrams of magnesium. Stop and let that sit for a moment. That is roughly 40% of the entire daily requirement for an adult, sitting inside a snack that fits inside a closed fist. No other food on this list comes close. But the story does not end with magnesium. Pumpkin seeds are also rich in iron, zinc, manganese, phosphorus, and plant-based protein. Zinc in particular is something many older adults are quietly low on, and it plays a documented role in immune function, wound healing, and in maintaining the senses of taste and smell as the years go by. Now here is something worth sitting with. Have you ever woken up at 3 in the morning to a sudden, twisting cramp in the calf? that sharp tightening that comes out of nowhere and refuses to let go. Magnesium is one of the minerals the body uses to release a muscle after it has contracted. Without enough of it, muscles can seize without warning, especially during sleep, and especially as the body ages. The pumpkin seed is one of the simplest known dietary corrections for that exact deficiency. Research has also been looking at compounds inside pumpkin seeds for their possible role in supporting prostate health in men and bladder function in both men and women. The science is still developing, and no firm conclusions have been drawn for the average person yet. But the early findings are interesting enough that researchers keep returning to them. The seeds are easy to add to almost anything. A scattering over morning oatmeal. A handful tossed onto a salad. A small bowl set out as a snack in the afternoon. Roasted is fine. Raw is fine. Salted is best avoided for anyone watching sodium. Few foods on this list deliver this much real nutrition for so little effort. A small jar set on the kitchen counter, eaten by the spoonful through the week, is one of the simplest things any household can do to bring magnesium back to where the body wants it. And what comes next is not a seed at all. It is a leaf. A leaf so ordinary that most people walk past it in the produce aisle every week without realizing what happens to it the moment it hits a hot pan. The leaf that comes next does not appear in the Bible by any modern name, but herbs and green plants run through Scripture from Genesis onward. The peoples of the ancient Near East gathered wild greens from the hillsides and stewed them down into the kind of dishes a hungry shepherd would have eaten without ceremony. What grew in those fields was the spiritual ancestor of what most people now call spinach. And spinach, when it meets heat, transforms in a way that is almost theatrical. A whole pan of raw leaves collapses down to a small mound in minutes. What stays behind is dense, dark, and concentrated. Half a cup of cooked spinach carries close to 78 milligrams of magnesium. Cooking does not destroy it. Cooking pulls it out of the cell walls in a way that makes it more available to the body than the raw leaf can. There is iron in there as well, the kind the body uses to carry oxygen through the blood. There is vitamin K, which plays a role in healthy clotting and bone strength as the years pass. And there are two compounds called lutein and zeaxanthin, both studied in research for their role in protecting the eyes from age-related macular degeneration, a common cause of vision change in older adults. Spinach also carries vitamin A, which supports skin and immune health, and a quiet supply of folate. For something so soft, so easy to chew, so simple to wilt down with garlic and olive oil, the leaf carries more than almost anything else in the produce aisle. One thing worth knowing: spinach is high in compounds called oxalates, and for people with a history of calcium oxalate kidney stones, that is a real consideration. Cooking reduces the oxalate content by roughly half. Eating spinach alongside calcium-rich foods like sesame helps reduce absorption further. For everyone else, spinach is one of the most rewarding additions to a daily plate. Anyone on blood-thinning medication should also speak with a doctor, because the vitamin K in spinach can interact with how those medications work. The key is consistency, keeping the intake steady, rather than swinging from none to large amounts, tends to be what doctors prefer. A handful of fresh leaves wilted into a hot pan with garlic. A scoop stirred through scrambled eggs at breakfast. A blanket of cooked greens laid beside any main dish. Quiet, dark, dense with what the body has been waiting for. And the next food has carried entire households through long winters for so long that its very name appears in the oldest grain lists ever recovered from the ancient Near East. The grain that has fed entire civilizations through long winters and longer journeys is woven through every chapter of Scripture where bread is mentioned. The first fruits offered at harvest. The daily bread asked for in prayer. The sustenance that carried whole peoples through hard years and impossible distances. Oats and the other ancient grains of the Near East were not luxuries. They were the floor of survival. A cup of cooked oatmeal carries around 55 to 60 milligrams of magnesium, along with a soft, slow energy that other carbohydrates simply do not deliver. But what makes oats different from almost every other grain on Earth is a single substance called beta-glucan. It is a kind of soluble fiber, and it has been studied so thoroughly that the Food and Drug Administration has actually approved a health claim stating that oat beta-glucan may help reduce the risk of heart disease. That is a claim the FDA does not approve lightly. It requires real, repeated evidence drawn from human research. What beta-glucan actually does inside the body is form a soft, gel-like layer in the digestive tract that slows the absorption of cholesterol and sugar. Over time, regular oat consumption has been shown in multiple studies to bring LDL cholesterol down in a meaningful way. For older adults dealing with rising cholesterol numbers, that is not a small thing. Oats are also one of the gentlest foods a sensitive stomach can hold. Soft, easy to swallow, easy to digest. For anyone with limited appetite, or for anyone recovering from a stretch of illness, a warm bowl of oats is one of the most forgiving foods on a plate. The body recognizes it almost instantly. There is a catch, though. Not all oats are created the same. The instant flavored packets that line so many grocery store shelves often contain added sugar and have lost a good portion of their original fiber in the processing. Rolled oats and steel-cut oats keep far more of the beta-glucan and far more of the magnesium intact. They take a few extra minutes to cook. They are entirely worth it. A plain bowl of oats topped with a handful of walnuts, a small spoon of sesame paste, and a few sliced almonds would be a breakfast an ancient farmer would have recognized as a feast of his own land, and nutrition science would today call one of the most complete morning meals a person can eat. Now, remember the food that was teased early in this story. The food in the book of Numbers that the priests of Israel carried as a symbol of life returning after a long sleep. That food is what comes next. The almond tree blooms before any other tree in the lands of the Bible. While other branches are still bare and the hills are still gray from winter, the almond bursts into pale pink and white blossom, sometimes weeks before the end of the cold. To the ancient peoples of that region, the almond was the tree that woke up first, a sign of life returning to a land that had looked dead. It is named in Scripture more than once. In Genesis, when Jacob sends his sons to Egypt during the famine, he tells them to carry almonds along with balm and honey as the best gifts of the land. In Exodus, the lampstand of the tabernacle is described as shaped like almond blossoms, with cups, knobs, and flowers. And in the book of Numbers, the rod of Aaron is placed in the tabernacle beside the rods of the other tribal leaders. By morning, Aaron's rod alone has budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds. It was taken as a sign that he had been chosen as high priest, and from that moment on, the almond carried the weight of an awakening, a symbol of life returning to wood that should have been dead. That was the food the priests of Israel walked beside. A single ounce of almonds, roughly 23 nuts, carries about 76 to 80 milligrams of magnesium, close to a fifth of what most adults need in an entire day. Alongside the magnesium sit vitamin E, monounsaturated fats, plant protein, and a steady layer of fiber that keeps the body satisfied between meals. For blood sugar, almonds have an unusually strong track record in research. The combination of protein, fat, and fiber slows the digestion of whatever they are eaten with. For anyone who is pre-diabetic or trying to keep blood sugar steady as the years pass, a small handful added to a meal can shift the way the body responds to food throughout the day. Almonds also carry calcium, which works hand in hand with magnesium to maintain bone density. As bones naturally lose density with age, getting both minerals consistently from real food is one of the most sensible habits a person can build. Almonds are moderately high in oxalates, so anyone with a history of calcium oxalate kidney stones should speak with a doctor about portions. For everyone else, a small handful most days of the week is more than enough. And the next food carried entire armies through battle and entire prophets through famine. The food that David's exhausted followers were given when they reached the wilderness with nothing left to eat. The bean comes through Scripture quietly, but with weight. In the second book of Samuel, when King David and his exhausted followers are on the run and arrive at the wilderness town of Mahanaim, the local people bring them provisions to keep them alive. Beans are explicitly on that list. They are part of the food that saved a future king during one of his darkest stretches. In the book of Ezekiel, the prophet is given precise instructions from above to bake a particular kind of bread. The recipe mixes wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. A dense, hearty bread designed to keep a man alive through difficult days. The recipe is so legendary that whole loaves are still made and sold today under the name Ezekiel bread. Beans, in other words, were not a food of the desperate in the biblical world. They were the backbone of survival itself. There are many varieties, and they all bring something to the table. But black beans deserve special attention here. A single cup of cooked black beans carries around 120 milligrams of magnesium. That is roughly a third of what most adults need for an entire day, in a single bowl. Kidney beans, navy beans, and white beans are all strong sources as well. Beyond magnesium, beans deliver protein, fiber, iron, potassium, and a range of B vitamins that the body uses for energy production and nervous system health. The fiber content is exceptional. There is the soluble kind that helps lower cholesterol, and the insoluble kind that keeps digestion moving forward and supports the long-term health of the colon. For heart health, the research behind regular bean consumption is unusually strong. Large population studies have repeatedly found that people who eat beans several times a week have lower rates of heart disease, better cholesterol profiles, and more stable blood pressure than those who almost never eat them. Decades of data, millions of people, not a trend, not a fad, pattern. Beans are also filling, inexpensive, and forgiving in the kitchen. They work in soups, stews, salads beside any main dish. Canned beans are perfectly nutritious as long as they are rinsed under cool water to wash off the extra sodium. Anyone with kidney disease should speak with a doctor about bean portions, since the high potassium content needs to be monitored in reduced kidney function. For everyone else, a few cups a week of beans is one of the most reliable habits in nutrition. And what comes next is the fruit that may appear more often in Scripture than almost any other. The fruit that the prophets named when they spoke of peace, of prosperity, of every man sitting under his own tree. There may not be another fruit in all of Scripture that appears more often than the figure. It is there in the very first chapters of Genesis, when Adam and Eve cover themselves with fig leaves in the garden. It is there in Deuteronomy when the Promised Land is described as a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates. During the reign of King Solomon, prosperity itself was measured by every man sitting under his own vine and his own fig tree. And in the Gospels, Jesus encounters a fig tree on the road to Jerusalem in a scene that has been studied and discussed for 2,000 years. The fig was not background. The fig was a measure of peace itself. A single fresh fig carries around 17 milligrams of magnesium. A half cup of dried figs, which is a deeply concentrated form, carries closer to 50. Along with that magnesium come potassium, calcium, and a generous, almost honey-sweet load of fiber. What makes figs particularly useful for older adults is the way that fiber moves through the gut. Figs contain both soluble and insoluble fiber, and the combination keeps things moving comfortably, feeds the beneficial bacteria in the colon, and quietly eases the chronic digestive trouble that many older people deal with privately. Figs have been used for digestive support in folk traditions across the Mediterranean for as long as anyone can remember. The potassium in figs also works hand in hand with the magnesium to support healthy blood pressure. Both minerals help blood vessels stay relaxed and flexible rather than tight and stiff. And the natural sugars inside a fig come wrapped in its fiber, which means they enter the bloodstream more slowly than refined sweets ever do. Anyone managing diabetes should be mindful that dried figs are higher in sugar than fresh, so portion size matters more with the dried version. A small handful is plenty. Fresh figs are at their best in late summer and early autumn, but the dried versions are available year-round in most grocery stores. And now, the last food on this list. The food a starving man in the book of Genesis traded his entire future for. The lentil. There are very few moments in all of Scripture as dramatic as the one centered on this single humble legume. The story is in Genesis. Esau, the older twin, comes in from the field one evening utterly spent, exhausted past words. He has been working under the open sun until his strength has left him completely. His younger brother Jacob is at home stirring a pot of red lentil stew. The aroma fills the tent. Esau, in a moment of full bodily depletion, agrees to trade his entire birthright, his inheritance, his future standing as the firstborn son, for that single warm bowl. And lentils appear again in Scripture, in the second book of Samuel, where one of King David's most fearless warriors stands alone in a field of lentils and holds it against an entire enemy army. A field worth defending, a crop worth protecting. For thousands of years, the Esau story has been told as a parable of foolishness and impatience. But look at it from a different angle. Esau was not a fool. Esau was a man whose body, in a state of complete depletion, recognized exactly what it needed: protein, iron, magnesium, folate, slow-burning fiber, every nutrient the body craves after long, hard labor. All of it inside a single bowl of red stew. A cup of cooked lentils carries around 71 milligrams of magnesium, 18 grams of protein, and an extraordinary 15 to 16 grams of fiber. The fiber slows the digestion of carbohydrates dramatically, preventing the kind of blood sugar spikes that lead, over decades, to insulin resistance. Large dietary studies have consistently found that people who eat legumes like lentils on a regular basis have lower rates of type 2 diabetes than those who almost never do. Lentils require no soaking. They cook quickly. A handful of dried lentils, a chopped onion, some garlic, a thread of olive oil, a pinch of cumin, and the warm bowl Esau smelled from across the tent appears in under an hour. Old food. Real food. The food his body knew even when he did not. So there they are. 10 foods rooted in the soil of the lands of the Bible, every one of them eaten by ordinary people in ordinary kitchens for thousands of years. Magnesium does not make headlines the way the newest supplement trend does. It is not exotic. It is not complicated. It is a quiet mineral the heart depends on, the muscles depend on, sleep depends on, and mood depends on. No one has to eat all 10 of these foods every single day. Even bringing back 2 or 3 on a regular basis can quietly change how the body feels over weeks and months. Anyone with existing health conditions or on regular medication should always talk to a doctor first. Beyond that, the table is already set. The food has been waiting. If this was useful, share it with someone who might need it. And the next video on this channel covers a forgotten ancient drink that the people of the Mediterranean fermented from a single bitter root and drank warm at the end of every long day. One of the oldest handmade remedies still alive in small village kitchens, and the body responds to it in a way almost no modern bottled beverage can match. Until then, take care of yourself, starting perhaps with what is already on the plate.